In every system, there's a signal, a pulse, a spark that cuts through the noise. Some call it innovation. Some call it disruption. We call it the protocol. Welcome to the grid, where ideas illuminate, where technology bends and reshapes the world around us, and where the future isn't predicted. It's engineered. Here, we decode the frameworks behind extended reality, AI, and spatial computing. We trace the lines between creativity and code, between human intention and digital possibility. This is where builders, thinkers, and explorers step out of the shadows and into the neon to share the systems, the stories, and the sparks that shape tomorrow's tech. So plug in, power up, and follow the signal. This is Neon Protocol.
And where did it go? All right, so welcome to Neon Protocol, everyone. This is the show where we go inside the system, shaping what comes next. Each episode, we bring the Neon Protocol team together with a guest, and we're going to explore what's working, what's shifting, and what's about to break open across XR, AI, spatial computing, and everything else that kind of falls into that bucket. I'm Gene, and tonight I'm also going to be joined with Lucky, Damon, and Ron. As part of the Neon Protocol team, they're going to help decode the trends, as well as the tensions and breakthroughs that I think they're helping shape this future of immersive tech. In this, we're skipping the hype. This is where we're getting into what's real and what's next. If you're enjoying the show, please subscribe on Spotify, Apple Music, and on YouTube. Every follow or share is really going to help us grow. And joining us tonight on tonight's episode, we're actually going to be joined by Dax Leepart from PICO. He's going to join us, helping us break down how their XR is transforming healthcare and how it's doing that on both sides of the experience, for the clinicians delivering care and for the patients receiving it. But I'm not going to go full in depth to it because I would hate to steal any of his thunder. So Dax, welcome to the show. Would you like to take a few minutes to introduce yourself?
Absolutely, Gene. Thanks for having me. Thanks to everyone else for joining as well. My name is Dax. I'm with PICO XR, and on the enterprise side, I lead our healthcare and employee training verticals. I'm based in Los Angeles, work with a lot of the healthcare orgs here, as well as some of the big national groups that we're currently deployed in. And I've been with PICO just about 4 years now. So I've been here for a little while now, so excited to join the discussion.
Wonderful. It's great having you. And also, I would be remiss if I forgot that Mark was actually with us too. So we do have Mark on the podcast with us. So no, Dax, it's great. And kind of, I think to get started with this is really, I think the question that we kind of have is, what is the status of this immersive tech in the XR space? Immersive tech in XR space. I'm kind of stating the same question, but what's kind of the status of this immersive tech being integrated into the healthcare industry? Because I think we're all very familiar with what's going on in the roadblocks in the enterprise space. But I think for our listeners and for us, it'd be great to know really what's going on in the healthcare space with this.
Sure. So within healthcare, there's really kind of two buckets as we take a look at the vertical, if you will. There's the training side of it, where we're training surgeons and nurses, even factory workers that work at manufacturing facilities involved in healthcare. And then the other side of the coin is the patient-facing experiences. These can be done therapeutically, or as we see a ton at PICO in ophthalmology, these solutions that leverage our hardware are being used to test and diagnose patients as well. So some of the same roadblocks that we find in the enterprise employee training, they're there in healthcare as well. But there's also some new considerations, things around like hygiene requirements, no cloth, no foam, no Velcro, which really should be best practice for other verticals as well, whether it's employee training or education or location-based entertainment, but they're a hard requirement in healthcare. And then on the IT side, there's some unique things when dealing with healthcare, especially if there's PHI or personal health information involved. There's HIPAA guidelines that need to be adhered to. But really, what's the same across all of these, and what is the main focus for PICO, is removing the friction in deploying into these different environments. All the things that we can do with our partners that make it easier for IT departments to say yes. Things like not requiring an account login to use the headsets being able to be put into kiosk mode. So the patient can only go to the prescribed experience. They're not getting lost in a lobby or ending up, watching a YouTube video or something like that. Being able to easily cast from the headset onto external monitors is critical. And sometimes in healthcare, wirelessly casting is not an option. A corded option just needs to work. Um, there's also the element of being able to control or interject a facilitator into an experience, that's using a tablet, for example. That can become incredibly important, especially if you're dealing with folks that might be medicated, or you get, people on the senior care side of things where technology in general can be kind of a blocker. And so, helping our partners, with things like disabling certain buttons on a controller, or making the experience gaze based because the patient might have an IV in each arm, and even using hand tracking isn't going to work. So knowing how to solve for all of those things that kind of hold up great ideas in healthcare is what's really allowed PICO and our partners to expand, and we have several deployments with large hospital systems that are well into the thousands of units, even the 10,000s of units. And part of that is about having the right resolution and having the headsets, be the right weight and have a balanced design with the battery on the back. But a lot of it is all of those sort of unsexy parts of removing the friction, which are really what allow things to scale from pilot to system wide adoption in a hospital system that might have 100 or 200 hospitals and a few hundred or even a few thousand clinics. That's where removing those points of friction really become paramount.
No, and I think you bring up some really good points with that because, not talking about any of the other hardware systems, but one of the things that we've noticed from being not in the hardware business, being the customers of it, is that each one seems to have had their not really their niche, but their focus over the past couple years. And you see one that's going in this direction. It seems like what you're describing is a lot of the feedback or a lot of the roadblocks that we've encountered previously, you guys are trying to really get ahead of the game, and making that integration as smooth as possible, not only for IT, but for the end user. Am I kind of off on that?
No, not at all. I mean, we even go a step further, when working with our distribution partners who are also our provisioning partners, right? An extra step we can go in terms of white glove service is if a headset's going to be used, let's say, in a couple different rooms at a hospital or a couple different buildings at a medical school, they might all have different Wi Fi networks. One of the things we can do is pre configure those Wi Fi networks ahead of time where we know the headsets are going to be used. So once the software is already provisioned onto the headset, the Wi-Fi's are already pre-configured, the MDM is installed, whether it's one of our partners like Arbor XR or Manage XR. Essentially, we want these headsets to arrive at the hospital, to arrive at the senior care facility, to arrive at the first aid tent at a live event, where all the user has to do is take it out of the box and turn it on, and it's just going to work. So those sorts of things are a lot of extra work on our end, and it's something that is inclusive with Pico Enterprise. When you buy the hardware, these are not additional add-ons or professional services that you need to pay for. It just comes bundled into the cost of the hardware. And that also makes it easy for procurement, for finance, for IT to say yes to the expansion of these devices when they feel like some of the risk is mitigated about, are there going to be extra charges? Or if we need phone support, do we then have to pay for an additional package or something like that? So all of those sorts of things we've learned over the better part of a decade are now just table stakes in our enterprise offering.
No, I think that's great, and as a customer, I thank you for staying away from subscription-based services, unlike some of the other companies out there.
We also appreciate the table stakes. That I mean, in the early days for enterprise, that was not the case.
Yeah.
Everything you described, you had to pay for.
As well as all the red tape for integration. I remember,
Bingo. Bingo.
a company that I was with in the past, it took us years to get approval for one headset, and we still were never able to actually get it because it came down to basically, for lack of anything, it's just a contest on who's gonna give in first. And, and I remember working with PICO, and it was a great relationship that they also had with the company, and
Okay.
seeing
Yeah.
some of the things, and I like hearing that rather than giving up and just moving completely away, you guys are embracing and moving in a direction that actually,
Yeah.
to me, is very encouraging to the end user.
Yeah, we gotta be careful. We're gonna end up turning into a Pico commercial for him if he.
I know.
That was great, Dax. Really, I mean, I could tell you've had to relay that those topics multiple times.
I don't think Dax minds the commercial.
Yeah, 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 exactly. We'll just have the Dax avatar. You put on the headset, and whoop, there he is.
No, nobody wants that. I can't guarantee much, but nobody wants that.
All right, so now actually interesting, because you did mention something about HIPAA. And I know, like, in factories and stuff, for those of us that are in the factories, we deal with OSHA and the safety requirements. HIPAA kind of falls as a very strict privacy requirement in the healthcare industry for those that are listening that aren't really familiar with what HIPAA is. So, really, in this era of lock all this information down, and yet we're going to allow AI into it. How are you what's your approach to HIPAA without telling us any of the secret sauce? I mean, how are you guys kind of approaching that particular topic?
It's a good question. It really depends on the setting and the user because they all sort of have different requirements. HIPAA is one thing, but then there's groups that go over and beyond that. And then there's groups that far overshoots their own requirements. So we can go as far as whether it's out in necessity or preference, like using the headsets in offline mode. Sometimes I've been in places, particularly on the East Coast, you could be in an exam room in the basement of the hospital and the Wi-Fi is just not that great. So it's not a security issue. It's just a practicality and a logistics issue. Also, giving these especially large healthcare organizations the ability to opt in or opt out of updates. I think everybody on this call has probably had an update happen overnight when you weren't ready for it. And then you go to use your device to show off what you've been building and it doesn't perform the way it did the previous evening, So we've learned all this stuff, not because we're great prognosticators, but because we've gone through and made some of the same mistakes that, our other customers and partners have. But the difference is we've actually chosen how we do business because of those teachable moments. And so sometimes it's Wi-Fi. Sometimes it can be things like encryption at rest. That's important to an organization. So being able to support those sort of elements. Gene, you talked about some of the OSHA stuff. In our world across verticals, we see ISO certifications as an important thing. Of course, especially when paired with a third-party MDM like ManageXR or ArborXR, you're going to take care of like the SOC 2 compliance piece. So there's different parts to this. And what I'll say is part of what has helped us dial in the healthcare aspect has been doing a lot of work in finance. We do a lot of training in retail banking. And finance is probably the one vertical that has even higher standards than even healthcare and HIPAA does. And it makes sense, right? These are people and organizations that are dealing with our money, right? And so if we can meet the standards of large retail banking, as well as taking what we already know about the healthcare space in general, then we're I don't want to say overbuilding the product and features, but we know it's at a level that is going to allow the right people in these organizations to say yes, whether that's IT, whether that's security, whether that's finance, legal, because Gene, as you know, and as Mark knows, being at a large organizations, there's a lot of stakeholders that need to say yes for a deployment to go from pilot to full scaling. And so we want to get ahead of that stuff and know that we have the yes answers, kind of just sitting there on the table ready to go. And when something comes up that's a maybe, then we can put all our energy into turning that maybe into a yes.
I love that. And I gotta tell you, starting with the finance, that's gotta be great for carrying it over for like the coding and billing within the healthcare.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's also just things that, at a retail bank or in an emergency room that these employees are dealing with that are hard to practice, right? Imagine in a bank like a robbery scenario, right? In the past, these banks would, hire actors to come in for an afternoon and everybody got to kind of see it one time. And if they were on PTO that day or sick, they missed it. Or if they were just preoccupied and some of it didn't sink in. That was kind of their one teachable moment. You certainly can encourage folks to make mistakes. And so, same thing in healthcare as well. You think about some of the things that are going on in an emergency room. It's going to be different in a rural hospital in the countryside versus an inner city hospital in New York City, right? And there are things and protocols that need to be practiced in an emergency room that on the surface might not seem like healthcare, right? Like maybe like, subduing an unruly patient, unfortunately, is something that comes up in an emergency room. Or even just, how do you help these employees that are in high stakes emergency rooms decompress from a really rough hour or two, right? They might have 4 or 5 more hours left on their shift, but they just saw and witnessed something that's really difficult to process. Having a headset in the wellness room or a break room where they can just go on, throw on a headset and go into a meditation app for 5 minutes might be the only relief they get during their break of that overnight shift. And yeah, so a lot of these things are just things that we've adopted as best practice that we find land well, kind of regardless of vertical, especially when they're aimed at those high level standards. That'll be more than enough for kind of most of the day-to-day sort of deployments that are out there.
Yeah, that's really, really intriguing. I don't know if you're watching the chat channel, Dax, but Mark posts in there, and the last thing he posted was, "Can you talk more about those use cases?"
Yeah, if you can,
Particularly, do you
Zach,
have
that'd
any?
be cool.
Yeah, yeah, because if there's any data around that and how the whole meditation app and how the immersiveness helps people to reset, I mean, that would be fascinating to
I
hear
mean,
Oh,
about.
absolutely.
and the focus also around the fact of in every industry right now with the hype of AI and everything else, right? Can you elaborate on sort of what I call the burnout use cases?
Hmm. There you
Yeah.
go.
Yeah, because especially Gen X is hitting that PTSD stage of really realizing what damage we actually have.
Have or have inflicted? Which?
I'm finding a little directed at me moment right now. Yeah.
No,
I don't
not
know.
at all. It's
Make
solely
what
at
you want
me.
of that question, Dax. Take off in whatever direction you want to go with that, man.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think the idea of wellness is something that's top of mind, whether you're talking about schools and education these days, whether you're talking about large companies, or healthcare specific sort of applications, right? I mean, if you think of any social media company, there are content moderators, right? And they're
Right.
oftentimes looking at things that are not what we would see on those social platforms, and they just need a break, right? And not every office building is in the middle of a gorgeous park where you can just go walk around, right? Or maybe you're
Right.
working in a late shift and safety becomes a concern. So we need more data around this, but we're seeing it work in schools. They use this not only as a moment to kind of chill kids out when things are sort of bubbling to the surface, but they also use it as reward content. Sort of like in my day, you had Oregon Trail on one computer in the back of the room. We see oftentimes in education that when students make the right decision during a conflict or they're just showing improvement overall, they get a lot of response out of then saying, "Hey, you can use the headset in the classroom at the end of the day." Sort of thing. And then you go over to adults who are employees. Again, you could be on a factory floor, you could be some sort of content moderator. maybe you work at a law firm. And again, these are high stakes, high stress, and just having the ability to know that there is a headset in a wellness room or in a break room where at any time you can just go and kind of detach because you need that moment, right? Or you just want to do a simple guided breathing exercise because that's something that's new to you, right? Like not everyone that's interested in meditation is a yogi or a meditation master. So it's
Right.
nice to have some of these, pieces of content and solutions that can be training wheels, if you will, that can guide people into, hey, this is how these breath techniques work. Here's how it's different with your eyes open or your eyes closed. So I think that piece is just something that's going to proliferate kind of wherever there's headsets. It's often a secondary use case, right? The headsets were deployed for a particular hard skill, to solve, lockout, tag out procedures or how to do a vehicle inspection or something like that. But then after a while, organizations say, what else can we do with this hardware? It's been successful for training this skill. What else can we do with it? And so that's oftentimes where these kind of wellness and meditation and relaxation apps get brought up. Now on the healthcare side, there's a ton of data, right? And using VR, especially post-operatively, you're seeing a definable decline in the clicks for pain medication. Um, there's also the ability for, people in VR to just be given a local anesthetic, right? Let's say you're having surgery on your finger. They can just give you a local anesthetic, place a VR headset on you where you're not visually looking at your hand, and they can do whatever procedure that needs to be done. And then 2 or 3 hour, you're leaving the hospital. Whereas if you put somebody under general anesthesia, then they have to stay there for a night or two. So it's actually an ROI driven thing for places that perform surgeries. They can get more bodies per bed in 24 hours when not having to rely on anesthesia. And the science, the neurology behind the pain reduction is actually pretty simple at the end of the day. It's actually just a matter of the brain can only process so much information. And coming out of a procedure, if it's processing all that is happening in a VR headset, it essentially cannot send as strong of a pain signal to whatever the affected limb or joint or whatever is. And so on the healthcare or the medical side, there's a lot of really good data. There's a particular use case that was just highlighted by the Mayo Clinic with one of our partners, Helium, that was done by the World Economic Forum. And the doctors are just talking about how they see from day one just a reduction in the number of clicks for the pain med when they're using this VR post-op. And then to kind of make a long story longer, if you go over to like the pediatric side of things, we have a number of hospitals that have found, if you put these kids in a VR meditation for 5 minutes before they go on the MRI machine, they move around a whole lot less and you get much better quality images, which also has an ROI, and not having to do a second run in the MRI machine, the costs associated with running the MRI machine, the technician that has to run it. So
Yeah, you
healthcare
just
side,
know.
there's a lot of good data. On the wellness side, we're always looking for more.
No, you just need to figure out a way to have the headset safe in an MRI machine.
There you go. Yeah, there's a
That
lot of
would be.
electronics in the headset, so I'm not sure how close we are to that, but
I know, but yeah, I experienced that same thing. But no, getting with that, like one of the things I've kind of monitored over the years that really has caught my interest is for dementia and Alzheimer's patients. In addition to pain management, but after the pandemic, you had a lot of senior citizens that for 2 years they did not have any physical or contact with anybody. I remember going to a nursing home and looking at my mother-in-law through a window for a year. And so when we get into like for dementia, Alzheimer's, or for something like this could, to me, I think this could be just a game changer in that area as well.
yeah, I mean, that's one that's near and dear to my heart. It's Alzheimer's dementia is something that's impacted my family on a couple of different generations.
Hmm.
And particularly in the senior care, there's a lot of loneliness. There's a lot of people that don't leave the four walls of that facility. So even if for 30 minutes they can get a chance to go walk around in a VR field trip in Italy or Greece, somewhere maybe they visited with friends and family 30 years ago. Like, allowing that moment to happen is just like one of the more rewarding parts of what we do. Yes, it's exciting training nurses and surgeons how to use the latest in robotic surgery and that sort of thing. But that part of healthcare, especially in the senior care side, where there's a lot of loneliness and confinement, to give them that feeling of freedom to travel, to move around in a city and see sites that maybe they thought they would never see again, is also a really important part of where VR is having just an undeniable positive impact on people's lives.
Yeah,
Oh, absolutely.
That's
Agree
Bob
completely.
Stone made a lot of mention of that in our episode with him, and
yeah.
around the aspect of heritage and uh, gr- aging, I believe was the term he used. But yeah, good points.
Yeah. And
Oh
then
yeah,
bringing
like
them
when I
bringing
get
the
older, if I
Alzheimer's.
could go into a virtual mall from the 80s, I won't ever take the headset off.
You heard it here, folks. Ship
As long
that.
as he
Ship
has
that.
Wham, he's okay.
Oh, wham. You know what? As long as you don't wake me up before you go.
Gene, I see a
Ba-dum,
couple
boom.
of I see a couple of comments about use cases related to like folks on the spectrum and
Yeah.
adolescents. And this is another important one that PICO touches directly. We have a partner that really focuses on this space on the content side, and it's incredibly valuable for these young people to be able to practice their morning routine, right? Like, this is what time I set my alarm, then I brush my teeth, and then I get dressed. That can have a lot of immediate impact and value, or preparing them for social situations that are a little bit out of the ordinary, right? Like a young person picking out a seat on the bus for the first time, or picking out a seat in the cafeteria where they might not have a big group of friends like, a more traditional student might. One that I've seen uh, be really impactful, again, not only for young people, but also for my stepmother, who's nearly 80 years old, is practicing what's going to happen at TSA at the airport. Why is this person touching me? Why are they kind of almost yelling at me and I'm being put into this line? You can see that just practicing these things ahead of time gives so much comfort, not only to the VR user, again, whether that's a young person or somebody in a senior care facility, but also to their caretakers, their family, their friends, knowing that there's a possibility that this can go smoother with practice.
Absolutely. Yeah, I actually got a chance last year. I was at a career fair and got a chance to meet a hospital that actually did that for any of the children that they have on the spectrum, especially for shopping experiences. So they can, they don't get oversensitized at the cash register or with all the commotion. It was just unbelievable, not only the results they were getting, but the impact you can tell that they were having in this, because it seems like it hasn't had this type of impact in a long time, or there hasn't been an impact like this in a long time, I'll say.
So Dax, when we look at the portfolio and sort of how, from a technology framework standpoint, Pico's changed, would you feel that a lot of what we're just talking about has influenced the sort of usability or sort of the form factor of the devices through the years?
Yeah, absolutely. Because one of the elements we haven't talked about is when VR headsets are included in part of an FDA approved product, right?
Mm.
One of the things that myself and we've learned while going through this process with a number of partners is for pediatrics, for example, there is a strict weight limit on the headsets that can be used. That was really never thought of before. And so, as we think of the future roadmap of devices, if the devices can be light enough where they can then adhere to those standards in pediatrics, that's a win not only for our users, but that's a win for Pico as well. So, to Mark's point, that's an example of where these learnings over the years have directly impacted what future hardware is going to look and feel like from a weight perspective, for example.
Ron's also asking, what are your primary markets with Pico?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Our primary markets, there's really kind of about four of them. There's employee training, there's healthcare, there's education, and there's location-based entertainment. Those are really the 4. And within those 4, you can subdivide those out, right? Within training, you have things like 3D design review. Pilot training is kind of its own specific vertical within training that's going to be different, obviously, than what somebody on a manufacturing line does. In healthcare, we talked about it a little bit at the beginning of the call. There's really the training aspect of healthcare, and then there's the patient facing side of healthcare. So there's all of these sub verticals, if you will, but the 4 main verticals are healthcare, employee training, education, and entertainment.
And which is the biggest, if you can
And
say?
which one's growing the fastest? Also, out of
Or
curiosity.
yeah, both.
They're really all growing, and this isn't just, political correctness. They're all kind of growing at the same speed. They're all growing quickly. And I think part of that is COVID brought, some of these changes about, or at least the process of starting it a couple of years ago. But at the end of the day, all of these things are ROI driven. Let's not kid ourselves about that. And so that's really what is enabling the growth across these verticals is the potential to improve efficiencies and improve ROI. And those sort of elements with what we do, and when I say we, the people on this call collectively do, is what ultimately drives the growth and expansion. Everything else is kind of secondary to that, because if it doesn't make sense to finance of whatever organization is, it's not going to make it very far.
I'm going to follow up. Ron has a second part of his question. Since he's not speaking for himself, I'll speak for him.
Sometimes that's
Which
better.
he loves when I do that. So let's look forward then. Those are the 4 main areas, and they're all growing, and it sounds like they're growing at a rate that hints at a mature market. Well, what are the opportunities then? What's next on the horizon? What are the next opportunities? Are there any beyond those 4?
It's a good question. I think one of the things that is just kind of
There you go,
right.
Ron. See, it was a good question. You should have asked it.
um,
Sorry, Dax. Go ahead.
yeah, no. One of the interesting things we're happening is seeing the sort of the expansion of what would be considered employee training moving into education. Right? I think is we're in the middle of this AI boom and surge. I think most people have heard there's a shortage of electricians, there's a shortage of plumbers, people that can build these data centers. But overall, one of the things that has learning and development departments a bit nervous is something they're calling the silver tsunami, right? Where a lot of the workers that know how to do particular skills, thinking of industries particularly like railways, subways, things like that, the people that know how to fix those high stakes parts or elements, right? It could be the power line for a train or something like that. Those folks are moving on. So what we're seeing are companies starting to take their training in their local areas and pushing the hardware and the content into the schools, because CTE education has been a thing for a while. But let's be honest, if you go into the average high school shop class, they don't have all of the equipment that is going to be needed for a young person to go into that profession. They might have a welding machine, but they might not have the right type of arc welder that is actually used in business. So local companies that are in charge of training have started to take segments of their deployments and move them into local area schools to, number one, help these students be better prepared, as they end high school and decide, do I want to go to university or do I want to go right into the trades? But it is also, from an HR perspective, a great way to attract new top talent by showing you are doing cool and cutting edge training to learn these skills, right? You're not going to be forced to just sit and look at PowerPoints and videos in a training room. You're learning how to use pieces of equipment that are hundreds of thousands, even millions of dollars, while still just being in your high school shop room. And you can, again, make mistakes. You're not going to damage the equipment. You're not going to injure a classmate. And so you can graduate from high school with some of the skills already required by these big legacy companies that are facing a shortage of workers. So that's really the first area, is just seeing this expansion of what would be employee training now moving into the schools.
Now, do you think, because this is actually a question that because I used to be an old high school teacher years ago, and when I got out of teaching is when the shop classes were literally closing in. They were all becoming computer labs, or they were becoming graphic arts, the traditional machine like auto body shop. I watched a lot of them go away. So do you see um the PICO headset and this type of tool being able to accelerate it back up to where it once was? So what I mean by that is it would for a lot of these schools that are now saying under this silver tsunami, we need to teach this again. Well, that now we need to build our rooms back. We need to go out and buy all this mechanic equipment, or we could just get headsets that could simulate this.
Yeah, I mean, look, the headsets are never going to replace all of the training, right? There's a time and place for the traditional training, but what it does is democratize the access and interest to these different fields that might not have been available before. Where the only way you could experience this before would be to go on site with somebody that was an employee at these companies, and then if we go back to healthcare, which also again remember has a training component, there are healthcare high schools out there now where you can graduate from high school with essentially the equivalent of a community college nursing degree paid for. You're graduating at 18 with that ready and ready to step into your next phase of, let's say, nursing, for example. So I think that's a really great way too, as schools get more creative with their curriculum, is, how do we make these folks be job ready when they graduate from high school, if that's the path that they indeed want to take?
Nice. Now, I know Mark was kind of asking a question. Mark, I'm going to see if I get it right, unless you want to ask it.
I'll ask
Uh,
it. No, I
go
mean, I
for it.
want to get on the recording, right?
Right.
Yeah. So
Don't
can
be like
you,
Ron.
Dax, can you share any sort of hard numbers around the silver tsunami? Like, how does it play into sort of what I call the growing blue collar economy, right? In regards to, I mean, think about UPS, right? A majority of our workers are blue collar, right? Our tech people are disappearing, right? Because we're automating everything, because that's what we do. But we still need drivers, right? We still need people that know how to solve the problem and get work done, right? And that requires a tool belt, right? So can you kind of elaborate on that, Dax?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, you take in an organization like yours, Mark, there are, so many different use cases, right? There's the classic kind of warehouse and distribution centers, pick and pack and, assembly and that sort of thing. But one of the things we found with a number of the delivery companies we work for is, how do they train for sort of asymmetric things that a person is going to encounter, right? Things like dog bite awareness, or being able to identify, is someone potentially following me as I'm getting ready to drop off this package, on a doorstep. Being able to start to pick out some of those things ahead of time, which kind of just seem like a nice to have, right? It's difficult. Imagine trying to train for dog bite awareness with your employees, right? That opens up a whole nother can of problems potentially, right? And you
Dax,
certainly
I
don't want
can't
the
talk
employee.
about that.
Yeah,
But
and you
that would
don't want the employee to make a mistake either. Whereas in VR, you can, again,
It's a safe place
encourage
to suck.
a
Yep.
mistake. Yeah, that's the old adage: a child touches a hot stove once. You know.
Very good.
I just want to play with the experience where I'm chased by a rabid dog. You could call it UPS Cujo.
Yeah, and
We,
then
we, we have a more formal name for that.
That'd
That's
be hell of
awesome.
fun, though. I'm not gonna lie. I have a neighbor whose dog chases the UPS guy every day.
And if you notice, he doesn't pepper spray it, does he?
No, he doesn't. He doesn't. He looks a little nervous as he walks around him and tries to avoid the dog, but very delicately and gingerly, at times. But he does do it. I
Yeah.
laugh all the time. I get
Yeah.
good giggles.
Where our UPS driver, even if I don't answer the door, I'll have my package with a little doggy biscuit right on my package for my pup. They leave it every time. It's awesome.
love that. Another area too where we see this stuff starting to grow is around kind of soft skills and interpersonal employee sort of interaction, right? Soft skills are a big thing, knowing how to de-escalate an upset customer, that sort of thing, but also how employees treat one another, right? Things like sexual harassment training, in a lot of instances, are much better done in a virtual world for all sorts of obvious reasons, right? But the training still needs to be done. And so I think that's another kind of area where you can give people the room to make mistakes, to say the wrong thing and learn from it and not lose a customer or not lose their job over it, you know?
Yeah, I was actually just gonna ask about that as, like, empathy builder, because I know in using VR to train for sales, I was able to catch that you could use it to understand the customer's point of view, and I think this would be a great tool also to maybe understand from the patient's point of view. For the doctor, this may be the 50th patient they've talked to in a day that's asked the same question as the other 49 patients, but to the patient, this is the first doctor they've talked to all day. And so, and really for patient and doctor, we're coming at from, or, from really two different sides of the same coin. And I always wondered, what type of empathy of the healthcare, even for like, patient bedside manner, what type of results you could see on this?
Yeah, that's a really good point, Gene, for a couple of reasons. Number one, I'm going to circle back to the ROI point, as I always
Please.
do. Oftentimes, patient satisfaction is now directly tied to reimbursement, right? So, if the patient had a better experience and they reflect that on their scores, there's potentially a better reimbursement for that provider, right? So, that's one way where it's being directly impacted right away. The other point you brought up, which is so true, is around empathy training, right? We think of our nurses that are out there, working overnights, doing just really the best work, in my opinion, that's out there. But there are some tough conversations that need to be had, right? Imagine a nurse who's delivering news to a family that, a loved one, grandma or grandpa, are not going to make it, and that's the worst news that that family might have ever heard. But at some point, that nurse needs to be able to, in a dignified way, transition to like, I know this is a really heavy moment for the family, but I also have 9 other rooms on my shift that I have to get to before the end of the hour. Like, how do you practice that sort of thing? And even just sort of getting the marbles out of your mouth, if you will, is really helpful in practicing having those sorts of difficult conversations.
Absolutely. Like I go back to how many of the times, whether it's sales, medical, or whatever, how many times in our careers where we expected to have that rough conversation with somebody and we never had a chance to practice. We just happened to draw the shortest straw that day. And so now we've got to be the one to deliver the bad news. And to me, it's just such a failing forward moment that could really deter people from a future career that
Yeah,
I think this could really help overcome.
yeah. I mean, it's like most things in life. Like, things do get easier and better with practice. Whether that's shooting free throws or having difficult conversations.
So now, what do you think? Where do you see some of the big conversations, and are you guys seeing like AI as being a good accessory to that, being able to generate, I guess, the conversation? So it's not so much as a scripted conversation as what we've had in the past, and being able to kind of create these scenarios out of it, or are you creating, or do you see it as more of a overall experience?
I mean, there are a number of platforms out there that are leveraging AI in these sort of soft skill, avatar driven conversations. You can kind of alter the demeanor of the person that you're dealing with. You can slide the agitation bar all the way up or the grief bar all the way up. I've seen sales orgs even kind of put parts of their sales script into the input that helps generate sort of part of the environment. And I think it's definitely an important element. I mean, the AI on headsets, we could probably do a whole nother discussion just around that point specifically, because I think there's a big appetite to leverage a lot of the positives of AI, but there are also organizations, particularly within healthcare and education, that the idea of kind of having omnipresent AI available on a device scares them for a good reason. And some of those. So I think it's striking this balance of how do we utilize AI where it could enrich these experiences and better the experiences, especially on the development side, or spinning up a on the spot conversation with an avatar, but also kind of knowing where to sort of draw the line and put guardrails on this thing. So some of the less desirable parts of AI don't find themselves into these organizations and into
Healthcare is definitely
deployments.
tricky with that, right? Because always listening, right? Of AI, you need like for it to be really part of the conversation, like a human present, right? So it needs to listen. It's going to be believable in syntax and whatnot. So healthcare has definitely been tricky with that. I think there are other verticals and that are easier. Obviously, companies like Big Brown, they're more hesitant, right? You go to the medium businesses of America, getting them to start testing these types of technologies. I think they're more receptive because they don't have the same types of bugs as big companies to like put real human capital. I mean, I think it depends who you're dealing with in this day and age, and the size and scale, as well as like also the end use, right? And where
Yeah,
That
absolutely. I mean, yeah, go ahead, Mark.
well, what I'd like to do is maybe generalize the question more, right? So, like, let's make it simple. What's your feeling, not Pico's feelings? What's your feelings on AI as part of like sort of the base platform with like, and then what's sort of your perspective of what's the implications of AI as it pertains to your key partners and customers?
Wow, that's a good question with a lot of layers. That I don't know if I'll be able to peel back all the layers of that onion in one succinct
This is a
response.
fun
But
conversation, so don't be too serious.
Yeah, but that's okay. It
yeah,
was just a simple question. It was a very straightforward, simple
It's real
question.
general, real easy.
yeah. So
no curves.
my take on it is I think it's an incredibly valuable tool, especially on the development side of things. Right? I know Lucky has experienced this. You have an interested customer, and then they want to see a demo, right? But of course, they want the demo to be custom to them, right? And Lucky then has to decide, I've got development costs associated with creating a custom 5-minute demo. If they're tools that will allow Lucky to rapidly spin up environments that are sixed off so you can give your customer that custom feel that they want without, burning a bunch of money on the development for something you don't know if you're going to win the project or not. I think that's like a clear case of where like AI is a huge benefit uh, to our world. I think also looking in healthcare, as we start to use AI more in things like radiology and drug design decision making, that's another clear area where AI is making radiologists better, able to diagnose more conditions faster. I think that's a great use of AI in healthcare. Um, but I think this is both my view, and I think it's a pragmatic view for the OEMs to take as well. Is I think it's let's provide AI where it makes sense, and let our customers, partners in the market tell us where it makes sense, versus just having something, again, to Lucky's point, something on hardware that's always listening is, I don't think, the right approach, because it just presents too many problems. I would rather kind of take less of that sort of spray and pray or wide shotgun method, and really kind of take a more pointed, sort of rifle approach, where this is where we know it's going to move the needle for our partners. Let's absolutely provide it there. This is where we know it improves the quality of the DNA helix models that are being used, or something that's used in drug design decision making. And over time, maybe that evolves to just being AI all the time on this hardware. But me personally, I don't think the market's quite ready for that yet.
Yeah, I mean, and yeah, I think the market's kind of backing that up, as seeing with what Microsoft's been announcing over the past week, and the cost associated with AI, and and I happen to live in an area that keeps fighting against the data centers coming through. So it's I agree with you that it's a matter of finding what makes the most sense, not just throwing it out there for tech's sake. So we had another question come in. So who are the advanced medical organizations that Pico's that you guys see collaborating with, or that you or that you have completed studies with. So what, I guess that's the question. I'm kind of fumbling it, Ron. Sorry.
No,
If you don't like how I'm asking it, you ask it.
no worries at all. It makes total sense. These are pretty easy. So, um, on the healthcare side, there's obviously the providers, right? When I say providers, I'm talking about hospitals, clinics, eye care offices, all of these sorts of things, right? There's training that happens there, and then in some of those instances, there's actual diagnosis that's being done in the headsets, especially if the hardware has things like eye tracking, and you can not only detect different eye conditions, but in an employee, you can take a look at things like cognitive load, for example. So, um, in healthcare, it's pretty straightforward. Um, in training, there's a ton, right? Especially if the training involves something that's expensive or dangerous or can only be done one time. The repeatability of XR makes a lot of sense. We're doing a number of trainings with firefighting organizations where, again, typical training, you can't encourage somebody to make a mistake, right? Because there can be really negative consequences to making those mistakes. But in VR, you can open the wrong door in a fire and learn why, you might not want to do that in real life. Um, but in healthcare, you've got the providers, there's also medical device. So they need to not only train their reps, but also they can use these headsets as a marketing tool where the rep might not be able to get a surgeon's time for 30 minutes, but they can grab them for 2 minutes in the hallway and hand them a headset and say, hey, go home and check out our new implant that I want you to start using. And that experience can be done in VR. There's a lot of democratization of training that happens in these headsets, particularly in areas where resources might not be as abundant as they are in New York City or Chicago. Somebody that's in a rural developing area that wants to be a surgeon can kind of scratch that itch and start to learn more about surgery. Um, there's a ton within nurse training, whether that's the basics, things like proper hand washing technique and how to, start an IV and things like that. There's the senior care facility sort of angle that we talked about. So there's a lot within healthcare. I think healthcare is probably the vertical that has the most subdivisions, if you will, because again, you're not only hitting the people providing the care, but you're hitting the people that are receiving.
Yeah,
And
Dax,
it's
just
awesome.
to clarify my question around the medical organizations that are doing advanced work. So I'm thinking like, the Mayo Clinic, Cleveland Clinic, Johns Hopkins, Anderson, Stanford, those kind of organizations. So are those, that's the ones I'm trying to understand. Are you guys working with them, or are there plans to work with them, or are they doing other stuff?
Yeah. So, I mean, we work with just about all of them that you mentioned. If you look at the top 10 largest healthcare providers in the US healthcare systems, PICO works with 3 or 4 of those currently, and we're skewed heavily towards the top of that.
Okay, so
Um,
what's your assessment of the nature of the work? Is it like medical best practices is one thing you've been talking about around training and surgery. What's being done in the way of research to try and analyze more complex diseases or the ramifications of taking certain pills or drugs, and the combination of that with the different types of DNA? This is getting more complex, and the more you can visualize what's going on in the body, it fast tracks understanding and plays into the immersive environment that is needed to, make progress here. So do you see any of that going on?
yeah, absolutely. With particularly within the pharmaceutical vertical, um, drug design decision making is a big thing, um, and being able to allow scientists and researchers who are in physically different locations to collaborate as if they were all in one laboratory together is immensely powerful and beneficial. To have, let's say, Mark in New Jersey and myself in California, we're both scientists. Uh, for us to both be able to step inside the same DNA helix or to unfold proteins together as we're designing a drug, as if we were in the same room together with our hands on the same test tubes. That's incredibly valuable. And I think a good real world example of that is we did a deployment with one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world that focuses part of their business on stroke care. And one of the things they wanted to accomplish with the PICO deployment was reducing the admission time, or reducing the time from what they call from admission to groin, which is from the time you come in thinking someone's having a stroke to the time that a catheter is inserted essentially in your midsection area. And they found through VR training, I forget the exact number, but it was like 42 or 48 seconds. They were able to shave off that time from admission to intervention, which in the world of strokes, where every 1 or 2 seconds has a radical impact on the long-term well-being of that individual, I think that's a real tactile example where this training really works. I think the drug design and stuff is almost like a little bit more theoretical, or kind of seems like Minority Report sort of stuff to people. But then you balance that out with these real world things like being able to shave 40 seconds off of a critical admission process, and the just sort of orders of magnitude that improves the results is just like a really great real world example of this.
What other impressive metrics can you advise us on that you guys have delivered?
You know, that's the one that I really just have kind of off the top of my head. But the other ones that, I think that are well documented are the patient satisfaction scores, right? You felt the nurse that you were dealing with was much more empathetic, or they provided you with patient education experiences that explained what the gallbladder is and why your mom or dad needs to have their gallbladder taken out, for example. Is just across the board, the patient satisfaction score is going up where XR is used. Again, that can be because they were dealing with a more empathetic caretaker, or the patient and their family just understood the procedure or the illness, if you will, better, because they were given some really good patient education info in VR that explains, okay, your dad needs to get their gallbladder taken out. What is the gallbladder? What does it do? What is the function in the body? Why can we survive without it? Why does leaving it in not make sense? We also see this in eye care, where really accurately you could show somebody with glaucoma, what is their vision going to look like if this is left untreated? Here's what your vision's going to look like a year from now. Here's what your vision's going to look like 24 months from now. Here's what it could look like 10 years from now if left untreated. So I think that also impacts positive decision making.
So Dax, so those are good insights about the patients being happier. But I guess to affect change in healthcare, you need to have some important benefits for the medical practitioners and the administrators. So if you're pitching PICO to these people, what's your value proposition?
Sure. So a good example that I'll borrow from my time with OSO was around surgical training and the readiness around that. Something like a total anterior hip replacement is a long procedure. It's about 3 hours long. Typically, the caseload to proficiency for that procedure is around 50 cases, because forever in surgery, the way you learn was see one, do one, teach one. Now, if you work in a specialty where that pathology doesn't present very often because it's a rare condition, getting to that number of 50 cases could take you 2 or 3 years before you see those organically in the hospital. There's a lot of data. Some of it is available on OSO's website, where that caseload proficiency can drop from 50 down to under 5 with repeated VR practice. So I think that's a real tangible example of where this idea of practice, in addition to the in-person experience, really does accelerate timelines.
Like what I'm trying to get at, Dax, is if I run a hospital, I want to be able to figure out if I've got 100 surgeons and they're doing like 8 surgeries a day now, could they do 10 or 12 with this newer tool? And could
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
outcomes be better, where there's more success rate, faster recovery, maybe lower cost, this kind of stuff? That's on the medical side. Then the administrator side, is around productivity improvements, but also reimagining work so that you're just, way more effective in outcomes, and you're just a much more better business model.
Yeah, I mean, the impact on outcomes is definitely one that, can't be denied. Um, if you're looking at this from an ROI perspective, there's also the idea of having your resident surgeons ready to perform procedures much quickly, because of that caseload to proficiency number coming down. And then we talked about this a little bit earlier, talking about, how things like anesthesia are used. Again, if you can give someone a local antiseptic, put them in a VR headset, and 3 hours later they can go home, that bed can then be filled by somebody else, which is something that finance at hospitals and surgery centers are really looking for. Whereas if you took the traditional route of anesthesia, that person's not going home the same day. They're going to have to stay at least a night. So that is an example that I think has really black and white numbers around the ROI, where we can just service more people in a 24-hour period if we're not so dependent on medication.
Interesting. Stanford University has a hospital of the future. Are you part of that?
So we work with Stanford on a number of different use cases. I can't go into all the specifics, but yes, we work with the various teams there on a lot of different things.
So, what are the main barriers to meaningfully grow the market?
So a lot of them is just unfamiliarity with technology. Despite healthcare using some of the most advanced technology on the world to perform incredible, basically miracles, there's also a bit of an aversion to using some of the new technology that's out there. In the past, hygiene has been something that we talked about early on the call that sort of some of the other OEMs have kind of neglected or just chosen to forget about. One of the other ones is, there's a percentage of people with traditional XR that experience motion sickness. We're really excited about future hardware that we have coming out that is at a resolution and can run at a frame rate where we're finding almost the complete elimination of motion sickness because the pixels are dense enough. The latency is so little that when someone moves their head, the frames keep up. And so I think continuing to eliminate or narrow the group of people that are just not XR users because of things like just uncomfortability with the headset and getting motion sickness, that's also really helping grow what can be done, particularly on the patient training side, where folks might already be feeling a little bit nauseous because of whatever procedure or medication that they're on. So that's something at PICO that we know will continue to help the expansion within healthcare, is narrowing that bucket of people who get motion sickness to the smallest degree possible.
No, that's awesome. And if you guys need beta testers, I think I speak for all of us when I say we are open to accepting a headset.
It is
Got
so good, Gene.
Gene had to go there. He had to go there.
You know what? I will go there at any given time.
Yeah.
And I love beta testing the new toys.
It's legit, Gene. I've had a chance to play with it with Dax. It's crispy. It's a very, very good device. The Swan is very good.
To me, it's the motion sickness, what Dax was just hitting on. Because for years, I would give people motion sickness bracelets to deal for it or to adjust for it. And getting rid of that, and I think would get rid of such a huge fear that's been there for years. But anyways, we are getting pretty near end of time, so I want to be respectful of everybody's time. For the listeners, we told you 60 minutes. We went a little over, as well as our hosts. So we do want to be respectful. But Dax, one of the things that we really like at the protocol is because people have heard us talk these messages over and over again. And so what we like to ask is for a final protocol for our guests to say, outside of anything we've asked you, if you were to give a piece of advice or give your insight into this industry for somebody getting started or somebody maybe that's in it that, what has seen the outlook of XR lately, and maybe they've lost their passion. So what advice would you give for working in this type of field and within this industry?
I mean, I think that's another good question. I think overall, the message I would like to get out there is a positive one. This industry is growing. The opportunities are growing. I think some of the contraction that's happened in the industry, while tough, you never like to see people's professions impacted. I think it's ultimately going to be a good thing. I think it's really going to leave, from the content side, the folks that are very dedicated and know what they're doing will continue to kind of rise to the top. I think for the young people coming out of school, these new AI tools allow anyone to be a creator and a storyteller, which I think is incredibly exciting. Virtually anyone can create a movie or can create a VR world, as long as they have the idea and the passion for it. Um, there is a growing need for sort of kind of experts and consultants that can bridge the gap between the content providers and the hardware manufacturers, and groups that are kind of at a starting place of, we know we need to change our training. We know XR can be beneficial. We don't know where to start, um, sort of thing. I think that's kind of an exciting part to think about. And I think just overall, I think good products and good experiences find a way, find a home, and become successful. I think one piece of advice I would like to give folks, whether that's large organizations deploying, whether that's partners and ISVs creating content, or folks that work for hardware OEMs like myself, is really focus on and obsess over removing the friction, because that's what kills everything. If you're creating an app, if there's a way to cut down on the number of times someone needs to hit confirm, or menus that they need to go through to get into the experience, that's huge. Organizations, ask whatever hardware partner you're considering, do their headsets easily go into kiosk mode? Can they be used in offline mode? Do they easily cast to external monitors? Those are all critical pieces. And then for people on the sales side, it's, making sure that you have buy-in across the stakeholder ecosystem, right? Make sure that finance is tied in, make sure that legal's tied in, make sure that procurement is aware of what's going on. All of those things help shorten the runway to successful deployment.
No, that's awesome. Thank you so much, my friend. And thank you for joining us and giving us an hour of your time. This has been an absolutely great conversation. I think a lot of us like I said, we were excited to actually to get a chance to pick your brain. And as you saw, the questions start coming very fast and furious near the end there. But we thank you, and we would love to, if you ever want to come back and either be a part of the panel, or if you ever want to, if there's some new information in PICO that you want to come and share, please, there'll always be able to be a seat open for you. We really have enjoyed having you, my friend.
That's awesome. I appreciate that. I'd be more than happy to come back anytime. So whether it's to talk about PICO or just talk about anything else XR or tech related.